Okay, good morning, everyone. It's Tuesday, April 27th, 2021, and we're going to get started with our pre-market analysis. Now, before I jump to my high time frames, I just want to point out that yesterday was probably one of the smallest ranges that we've seen in months on the S&P. I mean, we were pretty much in, if you look at yesterday here on this, just on the 1 minute chart, if you remove all of the pre-market action, at 6:30, right around the open here, we basically were in a 10-point range, and really we're probably in much smaller, maybe 4 to 5 point range for most of these moves. So this is not too characteristic of the current market, and it might be more so because we have all of these big companies coming out, getting their earnings, and then the market's going to kind of make a decision, and then we're going to bust one way or the other. So we'll have to see what happens here, but let's jump to our high time frames. Again, we just made a new all-time high in the pre-market, and I guess you can say in the overnight. And 3 months still looking super bullish. We're just continue to push here. So again, these new all-time highs are expected because we don't see too much of exhaustion on these higher, the super high time frames yet. So we continue to push inch by inch, point by point. And remember, yesterday we realized that our weekly candle that closed for last week started to show the potential of what could be some exhaustion. And we talked about what we were seeing here on the weekly and the daily in terms of the exhaustion pattern. And now with, again, we have pretty much 4 more days this week. We have today and then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday for this new bar to form, but we are now pushing again to a new all-time high coming up just a little bit higher, and RVI pushes even higher. So although the weekly was showing a little bit of exhaustion as of yesterday, with the new candle, we are seeing kind of we're not seeing the same story as we did yesterday, and this again has a few days for it to work out. So we'll have to continue to monitor. But as of right now, the exhaustion I was seeing is kind of being negated. So weekly still looks super strong. So we've got quarterly, monthly, and weekly with really no signs of exhaustion now. And something to point out here on our weekly is when I started to see a bit of exhaustion yesterday, what I didn't point out is that we have this extremely bullish candle. So you can see that we push down, we have this wick that's pretty much like 75% of the entire candle to the downside, and we ended up closing to the upside. So that is somewhat of a bullish indication. So we'll have to kind of keep monitoring that. You can see, let's see, if we jump to the past, you can see a lot of these candles here where we have 50 to 75% of the wick to the downside. We then continue to break up. And now here you have one on the opposite, and we have the breakdown. Right, and then in this case they looked like they tried to bring it down, but they couldn't. But here you have another huge wick to the downside. We end up pushing back up. Here's another decent example here, and so this is a very bullish indication, especially because our RVI is now kind of confirming the continued push up. So let's go down to our daily, and yesterday that's where we got a really clear exhaustion pattern. So we pushed from the previous high where we had a nice peak in RVI back here on the 16th of April. We pushed to make a new all-time high here on the 23rd, and we got a nice exhaustion pattern. So on Friday, we got an indication of the potential for a pullback. But remember, in yesterday's pre-market analysis, I did say that that pullback could be pretty shallow. Despite having some of the higher time frames, because we're in this push, that 20-point pullback could be all that we see. So, and that looks like that's kind of what's happening here. Now, this candle that closed, it closed a little bit lower from Friday. Remember, we did not quite get to the all-time high yesterday. We got 3 ticks away. So technically, you could say this is a double top, but it did close, and we were just a few ticks below the high of the day before, of Friday. And so this small little pullback on RVI is kind of makes sense, right? So if we closed a little bit lower, but then RVI came higher, that might be another indication of a little bit of exhaustion. But the day closed, and now the weekly and the daily, where we had somewhat of that bearish indication, is now no longer there. Now on today's candle, we pushed up again to make a new all-time high in the pre-market, and it was actually around midnight of last night Pacific time. And now we're pushing up again on RVI. So really, those signs of exhaustion are no longer there. When we go to our 4-hour, this is where, again, we have our previous high on RVI here pushing to a new high, but we also have the previous high pushing to a new high as well. So really not too many indications here of exhaustion. And what I am noticing is you could make the case that we've pushed to make a higher low, and this has pushed to make a lower low. So we'll have to kind of monitor. Like I said, this is not a divergence, so I don't want to keep that marked. We did push to a higher high, and so did RVI. Now, if you go all the way back to the last major swing high over here, yeah, you can make the argument for some exhaustion there. But overall, from the last major high, which was back here about the end of yesterday, there really is no signs of exhaustion. So I'm more paying attention to this potential bullish indication off the low. So all the high time frames are looking very bullish. The 4-hour even has somewhat of a bullish indication off of, let's see what the low is, 41.76 which I believe is our overnight low. So kind of like yesterday where we had bullish indications off the overnight low, we're getting that on the 4-hour. Now we can see if we get that as we dial down. So our final kind of high time frame moving into intermediate time frames here is our 1-hour. And on our 1-hour here, definitely as well, kind of see, now it's hard. Let me see if I can exaggerate the RVI here. So it's a little messy in here, right? But you can see that just like the 4-hour from that last previous high, we pushed just a little bit higher in RVI, and we pushed a little bit more on price. And so there's really not much of a divergence from that previous high. Now, again, you can extrapolate all the way back, and you can start to see some exhaustion going on. But overall, from the last previous high, which is what I like to pay attention to on these high time frames, there really is no indication. But when you look, just like on the 4-hour at that previous swing low, we pushed up to make a higher low, but we ended up pushing down to make a much lower low on RVI. And right now, as I speak, this candle, which will close in about 45 minutes, so we have time for this to kind of shake out. You can make the argument at the moment that we pushed higher in price, but the RVI is the same, if not a little bit lower here. And so there are some indications here on our high time frame charts of a little bit of bullishness off the lows. So we want to keep that in mind here as we jump down to our intermediate time frames. So give me one moment here. And we'll go ahead and pull up our 30-minute chart. Oh, I wanted to point one thing out here about the 60-minute, and I made this mistake yesterday. And so yesterday I was pointing out how there was no indication of bearishness off the all-time high. Now, it was Monday morning, and I'm going to use that as my excuse. But what I didn't realize here is we actually had a pretty clear bearish divergence where we pushed to a higher high and RVI pushed way down like that. So we did have that bearish indication, and yesterday we did have it. I think it was the daily and the weekly which kind of showed some signs. The 4-hour showed it a little bit, and the 1-hour did. But again, I told you we were in a pretty protracted uptrend. If I could pull back here, and so that indication could have just been for a small pullback. And that pullback ended up being just about 24 points. And so then we continued on, and we got bullish indications coming into today. So let's look at our 30-minute, and From a 30-minute perspective, again, from that previous area that we were looking at on the hourly, we pushed up here and we also pushed up in price. Now, if we look at the swing low before that, or the swing high before that, yes, you can argue that there is a little bit of bearishness off of the new all-time high. But again, these bearish indications in a bullish trend are just telling you of the potential of pullback. So even if you were to make the argument from the previous swing highs, we've already got the pullback from 92 to almost 72, so almost 20-point pullback. And again, that could be all that we get in this kind of push. Now, right now, remember I said on the 4-hour and the 1-hour, we did have some indications of some bullishness off of the overnight low. Now, what I'm noticing here on the 30-minute is from the previous major swing low, which was right back here. You can see we came down, pushed up. There was just a little bit right here, and then a push up. And really, so this was the most important swing low to really compare here on this chart. We have a push higher on price, but a much lower push on RVI. So still have some pretty bullish indications here off the overnight low on the 30-minute. So 4-hour, 1-hour, and 30-minute all giving us that indication. Now, we did push, let's see, from about 76 to almost 86. So we pushed about 10 points. So we have to keep in mind that we did get somewhat of a reaction already. And although we have higher time frame indications, that doesn't mean that every time it's going to push for 100 points or something. So we got a 10-point push. Now we're going to have to watch this overnight low to see if the bulls can hold and continue up. Now, in the pre-market here, what I did notice is that we got a little bit of a bearish indication off of this push up to test the CP here. So we had this little bit of bearishness, and I'm actually wouldn't be surprised if this was exactly a 50% retrace, or okay, 50, close to 61. So we had a nice 61.8 retrace of the whole push down from the all-time high, and then we have this bearish indication, at least on the 30-minute. I do not really see it on the 60. You could kind of make the argument because we pushed from that to that just by a little bit. I hate when I do that because it's impossible to actually get the to get the retracement there and press delete. But we did have just a slight push up higher, and then the indicator kind of stayed the same, if not sloped down just very slightly. So we did have a little bit of a bearish indication there, and we'll see it on the shorter time frames, and we've got this pullback here. But what I'm noticing on the 30-minute, again, is that bullish indication off the overnight low. We pushed, we got a little bit of a bearish or exhaustion pattern as we pushed up, but that doesn't mean that this push up is over with. So we got a 10-point pullback, and now we're going to have to kind of look to our intermediate time frames and short time frames to get some bias coming into the open. So remember, overall, we have a nice bull bias on the super high time frames, on the high time frames, and as we get into the intermediate time frames, they're confirming what the high time frames are saying off the overnight low. So let's go to our 10-minute here. And again, the 10-minute, if you look back to a lot of the swing lows in the past, we're much lower on RVI, but price has not broken that last major swing low. So there are still indications here of bullishness. Now, it is much more of an extrapolation to go all the way back to the low we made at the end of yesterday, but that's the most major swing low to look at here, and you can see that price pushed, or RVI pushed all the way down. And so there is an argument there for bullish divergence. And then again, like I said, as we go to our shorter time frames, we did get a little bit of bearishness when we tried to push up and test the 61.8 and the CP here. So right now we are stuck kind of in this chop zone. We have a lot of bullish indications off the overnight low, and so our bias is going to be bullish, assuming that we can hold above this 76. Let's get the actual number, 76 quarter here. we should continue to push up and test the all-time high here. And that's kind of the story we're seeing. We did have a little bit of an indication here on some of these intermediate time frames of some exhaustion in this push up, but now we've pulled back about almost 5 points, and that could be all we get in terms of exhaustion. Now you can see that we're trying to now push here from this 10-minute perspective. So